Hey everyone, pleasure to be here at the Telium Virtual Conference, tuning in from Amsterdam today. We're going to talk a little bit about creating and optimizing a multi-channel customer journey and engagement strategy. But before I kick off, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Wout Laban. I'm the head of customer success at Leanplum. Myself, I have a background in growth marketing. I've worked with various startups doing full funnel marketing, et cetera, et cetera. So there I've got a wealth of knowledge to share with you guys today. And we'll mainly be focusing on, hey, what is the core foundation that we need if we're getting started with engaging our users? So in a nutshell, we're going to be focusing on how can we create a strategy that really keeps our users engaged. But not only how do we create that strategy, but how do we continue to optimize that on a day-to-day basis, essentially? And what's really the foundation that we need for that? And this is where obviously Telium comes into play as well as our technology. And I'm very happy to share a few tips and tricks around that. Let's take a look at sort of the standard customer journey. I bet many of you have seen similar diagrams like this, where at the beginning we're acquiring a user. They go into some sort of an onboarding stage. If this is a mobile app or a web app or whatever your service is, you probably are doing a first touch point with them to get them introduced to your service. Then you have an area where they continuously are being engaged, and all we want to do is eventually drive them to a conversion. If that is an e-commerce, that means that that it might be just a point of sale. If it's a subscription app, then you obviously want to see a user subscribe to maybe a monthly or yearly plan. But from there on out, it doesn't stop, right? Because there's a risk that users will go dormant. They'll stop using your service, or they actually become, move into that advocacy and loyalty stage where they become loyal users, maybe even bring in additional users. And this is then a continuous loop of how you keep these users engaged. This is obviously a very standard sort of funnel. However, this is, the ideal picture, but this is the more realistic picture that I have in front of me right now, which I bet a lot of you, if you work in CRM or in marketing or even in product, you'll probably are very, very familiar with this. We acquire users, we spend a lot of time and effort there. They go through onboarding, but quite a lot of them actually drop off really, really, really fast. They go dormant, we try to reactivate them, and they churn or they uninstall or they delete their account or whatever it might be. And obviously that's what we want to avoid. So to do that, we really have to start thinking as a wider team. Now, usually everybody wears their own little hat. If you're in user acquisition, you care about acquiring users. If you're in CRM, you care about the engagement of it. If you're in product, you care about the features that the impact that has on your part of the product that you're building. However, from the user's perspective, and it's kind of like the line you see here in the middle, that is one and the same thing. They're looking to use one particular product or service. So they really go through a different line. They don't particularly go through acquisition, marketing, engagement, product, et cetera, et cetera. They go through a discovery, they make a decision, they have their first interaction with the product, they want to get familiar with the product and onboard into it, activate, retain, and happily use the service. From your side, there's many, many different things that we can do. There's in-app messaging, there is, email engagement, there's retargeting, we can do SEO, we can do ASO, we can personalize things, you name it. There's a lot of things out there that we can do to help improve that. But if you want to impact your conversion and retention, you really need to sort of morph all these things together, because you see that product, CRM, and even UA have a lot of different things in common with each other. And what we often see is that the customers that we work with, there's not much alignment between each and every one of these stakeholders, which makes it really hard to create a good engagement strategy, because everything you do externally with your user has an impact on what and how to use the product exactly. So the very first point that we want to get started with is really at the very bottom of that funnel. It's like understanding our users. Who are our users? Why are they here? Which part of their journey are they on? Are they making a decision right now if they want to start using the product? Or are they at the point where they're ready to be onboarded? Do they understand a certain feature set? What type of knowledge do they already have? Et cetera, et cetera. And that's obviously where we get into data collection. Now, if we look at that from a marketing lens, what we often see is that marketeers are like, hey, we live on this, what we see here, the second one is engagement layer. Like, we want to target and personalize and engage these users. somebody subscribed to our service, we're going to hit them with a bunch of emails trying to get them, to upsell or to buy more or whatever it is. However, what we see the most successful marketing teams or growth teams, they really focus at the bottom of this pyramid, on the access layer, as we call it. Because on the access layer, this is where we really start to collect the data. Because before we can engage with our users, we really need to understand, hey, what type of data are we collecting? How do we map all these connections with each other, all these different tools that we're using, for example, or these just different data points that we have? What does that mean? Before we can then start engaging with it, we need to analyze this data. We need to understand it. We need to define it. We need to segment it. We need to monitor it. Who are the audiences that are coming in? Who are these user groups? How can we define them in such a way that it makes sense for us to then engage with them? After that, we get to the actual engagement part. This is where we start to interact with these users. If that's an in-app message, if that's making a certain feature available in the product, if that's an email, you name it. And once we have all of that done and we have a good strategy in place, that's when we get to the optimizations and the A/B testing. This is where we have advanced analytics, where we really dive deep into like, hey, where are the gaps in our funnel? Where are the potential problems that we could solve that we can optimize this? What are the things that we could test to improve on? But if we don't have this full stack here, you're not going to be able to do that. And this is really a message that I love to drive home with the clients that we work with, but also just for marketeers in general. This is a super important thing. And this is really where you start to work with the various stakeholders within your team and why it makes sense to have people like that on the marketing team. We'll touch a little bit upon that in a minute as well. So what I really tried to tell you here is like, we need to have these user definitions. So what does that actually mean? Now, we all know the simple funnel, kind of like the R metrics. We acquire a user, we onboard them, we activate them, we retain them, they turn into a paying user. That's fantastic. However, most of the people that I work with, and I go in like, hey, what does an onboarding user mean? I'm like, well, when a user is onboarded, right? Simple. However, does that really mean, or what does that actually mean in terms of the data points that you're collecting? And is that definition aligned with what somebody in UA might think and what somebody in product might think? And this is where we obviously start to see a lot of discrepancies. And the reason why this is so important, because if you as a CRM marketer are trying to optimize for users that are onboarding on, let's say they need to create an account, whereas product actually considers them, hey, they're only onboarded if they've created an account and completed X, Y, and Z event, because then we really know that they understand our product. So creating these definitions and having them on paper and making sure that you are aligned across your organization is the very, very first step if you want to start building out a strategy. Because if you don't have this and you start building out up and upwards towards this optimization layer that I just showed you, you're gonna at some point optimize for the wrong things, or somebody else within your organization is gonna take it into a different direction. And now this is a very standard funnel. But what I want you to do is really go beyond that and think about, hey, what type of users do we have in our user base? And what type of segments should we define that we want to work with? Do we want to create power users or hesitant users? Do we have slow learners or quick adopters? There's many different things. And for each industry, for each vertical, this differs. For each app or product, this differs. And this is really something important that you need to understand and you need to work with, because if you know, like, hey, this is what's going to take for us to get the most valuable users, and we can increase that by X% by just having good definitions and optimize towards it, that can really make or break your business or really make an impact on your business. So really go in and look at this and see if you have this documented. Once you have this documented, then you're set up for the next step, which really comes down to this, something that I call campaign management. Now, campaign management is really just an overlapping term that allows you to understand, hey, what type of engagements are we running with our users? And unfortunately, most teams, they come in and they're like, hey, you know what? We need to send out more messages. So they start here at the bottom of the layer here where you see all the messages, and they're like, you know what? Our 7-day retention is not good. Let's send out a message on day 5, day 7, and day 10. Just boom, boom, boom. Let's go. And this might have an impact. This might actually uplift your D7 retention. However, you don't put the user into context and you don't use all the data and the definitions that we just talked about. So if you want to build out good campaigns for your engagement strategy, this is how you really should run through it. So we started at the top. We create these user definitions. Here I took the standard funnel, but this should be customizable for you. What are the particular segments that you're looking at? You can even map this out further where you say just like, okay, hey, we have this whole thing mapped out for onboarded, but within onboarding we have, quick adopters, slow learners, whatever it might be. Then we want to define different milestones. What does this user actually have to do in terms of hit sort of like enter the next bucket? Which milestone do they need to hit? Do they need to make a purchase? Do they need to create an account? Do they need to complete a level? Do they need to invite a friend? What is the one thing that we're looking for? What's the North Star within this particular bucket to move the user forward that would actually drive not only value for us as a business, but also value for the user so they stay engaged longer? Once we know that, we can actually think about, hey, what type of campaign should we run? And this is a very important step. Because usually we start to look at messaging like, oh, hey, let's grab all these users, batch blast, boom. We send out 500,000 emails to this user group, and that's great. But I think a fundamental shift is to start to think in terms of campaigns, because as I said before, you have a lot of overlap with, hey, what is our product actually offering? And that's why I added this row in here. What is the in-app experience or the in-product experience that we're actually giving to our users? Because if, let's say we have an in-app tutorial, or there is, certain highlights within the application, or certain knowledge that a user already has gotten, maybe it doesn't make sense to at that moment in time send out this message. Or maybe it should be a message at that touch point, but with different content. So if you start to walk through each of these steps, creating the actual messages will make a lot of sense. And a campaign can be so much more than just one push notification. A campaign can be like, hey, this is an in-app message with an email, with a push notification, and we're going to change this experience within the app for every user who qualifies for this. What that kind of creates is more of a multi-touch approach that can drive so much more conversion. And this is what we see as well. If we look at our data, our customers that are using multi-touch and multi-channel, so combining push notifications with email and in-app message, they really see far bigger results in terms of retention and conversion, because you're hitting your user at different touch points. And that's not just a volume gain, it's just each channel allows you to create a new touch point or to create a unique touch point in a different way with your users. Now, why do we want to run through all of this, and why do we want to know all this? Well, really the gist of it is that we want to create a seamless experience for your users, right? That's what we want. That's how users want to use our products. They want to have a very easy flowing experience that takes them from one step to the other. However, there's a ton of use cases, if we look at it from a CRM and marketing perspective, that we can run, right? There's so many options that we have, especially if we run through all these steps. So we can see here, we've got some calendar-driven stuff, so we can send out newsletters, new arrivals. This is particularly focused on e-commerce, just to set a bit more of a focused example. But we can do this for subscription services or any other service as well. There might be discounts or new arrival automations. There's a lot of automation that we can do as well. When a user searches for a product, when they browse a product, when they favorite a product, when they add something to cart, when they enter a certain geofence, when they want to cross-sell or next sell, a product review. There's so many different steps throughout all these stages of the life cycle that we can create and engage the user with. So what you then want to do is, before you just say like, okay, let's tick the boxes on all of them and let's start building them out. No, that's why we go through these previous steps to really define, hey, what do we need to create for which segment? Where does a user get stuck? And that's where you want to map out a particular user journey that fits your application, your product, your service, whatever you have, and map out, hey, where do these different use cases fall in, and for which segments should they be? So here's an example user journey for an e-commerce app. Let's say it's a mobile app. We acquire the user, they download the app, fantastic. But this is just one particular way a user can go through this funnel to get to a purchase, and the different types of campaigns they might hit. The user might go in straight away, search your category, browse a product, start to check out, then create an account, right? That's usually how e-commerce apps work. Complete the purchase, and then we're off to the next purchase. But this can be completely other way around as well. Maybe a user first creates an account, or maybe first they, add a bunch of things to their favorite list. So there's many different journeys a user can take, and that's why it's so helpful to create these segments. And really, what we call internally is called audience management. How many users do we have in these particular segments, in these particular audiences, and with which of these campaigns do we want to target them? So we make sure that we create the right touch points. Running through these exercises is really the basis of creating your overall strategy. Now, obviously, we wouldn't be here without Telium, and I want to talk a little bit about how our technologies work together to fully realize this by an example of a use case. Let's say we have a user, Jayla. Jayla might run through a particular use case, and the fantastic thing is of how these two technologies can come together. Obviously, Telium is the best at collecting all this data, funneling that from many different sources, so we can really create this complete overview of the picture of the user that we want to have, qualify them into a certain audience within Leanplum to then hit off the different engagement models that we have. So by fueling essentially Leanplum's engine with data from Telium, we can then start to really engage users in the right direction and drive them to conversions, know which channels they are most successful in, and really make sure that we not only do our business good by creating more conversion, but also create that seamless experience for the user. And this is really powerful, in my opinion, and something that all digital products should look at. Like, how can we collect all this data, connect it to the right sources so we can create the right experience? Because it's not necessarily about as much messaging as possible or knowing the most about our users. No, it's really, can we use this to create a seamless experience and create a better connection with our users so they stay loyal and they get more value out of our products? Cool. Just to take a quick pause here and just kind of like wrap up what I just spoke to you about. So if you want to get started with creating good campaign management, if you really want to up-level yourself from sort of the engagement that you're doing right now and put together a strategy, this starts with understanding your users and really take the time to really create a good map and use different stakeholders within your organizations here. This might be somebody from BI, might be somebody from product, might be somebody from user acquisition, CRM, whatever it is. Put together a squad that's really going to understand, like, hey, what do we want to achieve? What is our vision as a product? What is the experience that we want our users to have? And where do we currently see the best conversion, or what are the interesting milestones and touch points that we have? Once you have that, you want to clearly set these definitions and make sure that everybody is aligned. And that as you start to experiment with this new engagement strategy, that product doesn't ship new things, or the product isn't optimizing something within the app or within the experience that would work against what you're trying to do within your marketing efforts right here. And then obviously set up a tech stack that allows you to do this. Like I said, it crosses many stakeholders within your organization, but the technology of today will allow you that you don't always need developers or engineers to run everything through it, as long as you have your tech stack implemented, right? So you can easily adapt on use cases, because this is an ongoing thing. Like, if we just look now how we all need to manage with this COVID situation, for a lot of businesses, this is they're seeing all-time growth, but it means they have to adapt and interact differently with their users. For businesses that are heavily impacted by this, it's the same thing. So having a tech stack that's set up like that and having the data in place to then engage with your users in a quick and adaptable way, that is a really powerful thing to do. So those would be my 3 things to really look out for if you're starting to recreate your strategy. However, that's not where it stops. And I want to touch just a little bit on A/B testing and optimization. I think A/B testing is a fantastic tool, a fantastic technology and process and methodology to optimize whatever you want to do within your app, but it's not talked about in great detail very much. It's also often undershadowed, as in like, oh, we just test A versus B, and then we'll get to an answer. Unfortunately, it's not that simple, and that's where a lot of organizations that start with A/B testing actually fail, because they'll just try something, it doesn't work, lose buy-in within the organization, and then it all starts to crumble apart. So if you want to start A/B testing, you really have to commit to it, and you have to build this in within your strategy. Now, it lives here on this top layer. So I just grabbed the top of that pyramid to really talk about optimize, because we cannot optimize until we have a decent engagement strategy in place. We need something to build up on. But on the other hand, it is really a combination between these two, because it's the engagement that we can test on, the engagement of the users, if that's within product or with external marketing touch points. The first myth that I kind of want to just like set the expectation for, there's two different things. We have optimization and experimentation. The reason why I split them out, because for both of these, we can run an A/B test. But it's sort of the mentality as a first step that you need to start looking into. On the one hand, we have experimenting. And running an experiment is trying, in my words, something completely new to see if it moves the needle. So where we have on the optimization side, just a small tweak. So let's say we have a push notification here, and we just on the second one, we entered the first name. So we add a bit of personalization. Hey, does this small optimization give us a slight uptick in open rate, for example? That's great. But we only optimize and we only test these tiny, tiny little things on things that we know that already work. This push notification works. We've seen an uplift before in an experiment that we run. Now we're optimizing it. And that's a different process because these things tend to go much quicker. They usually have a lot smaller incremental positive outcomes, which are just fine. We're not looking here for something that really breaks the bank. No, we're looking here for something simple that just moves us up the ladder a little bit more and optimize something that works. To touch back on the experimentation. So this is really where we try to move the needle. So here we want to try big concepts. Let's say we're going to do a complete new onboarding experience. Right, we're going to move from an in-app tutorial to an onboarding video, or we're going to do a five-step email campaign that we've never done before. That's a big experiment. That's what we want to run as a holdback. We're not going to worry too much about, okay, hey, we want to personalize this, copy changes here and there. No, is this going to move the needle at all? Do our users care about this? And that can be positive or negatively. When we start testing, we're always wanting to see these big upticks in positive results. Once we see a negative result, that's actually really good because that means, hey, maybe we removed something that users actually cared about. Maybe the new thing that we thought of is not the right thing, but we are touching something that's very important to them. A case study that comes to mind is we work with Tesco, obviously a large e-commerce player, and in their application, you can buy products online, and they had an add to cart button, which was just on a normal page, but they had so much product information that as soon as the user starts scrolling, it completely disappeared out of the picture. So they had an hypothesis. If we just leave that add to cart button at the bottom of the page, we just stick it there as a banner, users will probably just see it and will start buying more. The first test that they ran turned out that users actually didn't see it, and the add to cart went rapidly down. Now, they thought about some more and thought like, oh, this could be potentially because of banner blindness. Users just don't see it because it's just always there. So what they did was said like, hey, you know what? Even though the experiment was a failure, we were touching something here that moved the needle because it really had a significant drop in users who clicked add to cart. So we know we're in the right area. The solution that we had was just not the right one. So they did a follow-up test where they actually just sort of implemented both the normal add to cart button, but as soon as a user starts scrolling, then it would lock onto the bottom, which in that case really saw them, I think it was a 3-point-something% uplift for them, which was a great result. So sometimes if you do an experiment like that, it's a bigger thing. You're just trying to see, hey, do we move the needle or not? And from there on out, we might want to optimize it with like small tweaks in color or whatsoever. The second thing is just the process and the overall thinking about this. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. I could talk for hours about this topic because I'm really passionate about this. But if you start with A/B testing, it's going to take time. We always hear about, oh, we're going to do rapid testing and we're going to do everything so quickly and run 70 tests at the same time. And then, we're going to optimize like how all the big players do it. But in reality, A/B testing takes time, and that's okay. Because if we do it right, we're going to see results. But we have to touch upon a problem. This is step one. We really need to define this, and we need to know where does this problem come from. How do we get to this problem? Is it because through user surveys? What kind of data do we have to show that this is a real thing and not just a hunch from somebody saying like, oh, I think we can optimize this, or I think we should test here. We really want to make sure that we have something. Then we're going to design solutions on this problem. Like, hey, okay, we've seen that this is a problem. What kind of solutions could potentially solve this? And we really want to go through multiple here. And the way I like to do it, if we do this in a workshop, it's essentially like, let's come up with 5 to 10 different solutions that could work for this. And then for each of those 5 to 10 solutions, we just do a little grading system. We figure out the top 3. And for the top 3, we're going to think of 2 to 3 different variants. So by that time, we'll have 10 things that we could potentially test. So if you then run into the problem of the use case I just talking about, like, hey, the initial test shows that we move the needle but the outcome wasn't as expected, we have a couple of more variants in the pipeline that we can say like, let's tweak it a bit. Let's try something slightly different, but we're going to stay in the same area until we start to see those results. Then number 3, set a success criteria. This is super important. We want to have the right success criteria. And what that means is that we need to set up metrics before we launch a test on what exactly we want to see. So which metrics are we going to look at to see if the success of the test had a success or a failure? And we want to give that a bit of a criteria, because after the test, if we look at it like, okay, yeah, we're going to look at day 1 retention. Day 1 retention had an uplift of 5%. That's amazing. Was it? If we define it up front saying like, hey, we're looking for a 3 to 5% increase in D1 retention, anything higher than that, we're also fine, but this is the minimum success criteria, then we're going to be happy. So if we only have a 0.5% uplift, that was not what we were looking for. It might still give us some learnings, but it's not the type of metric that we were looking for. So setting up these test criteria is super important. Then you're actually going to run the test. There's a whole section here that we could talk about on how to run the best tests and get this going. And then the last part is really to document learnings. So after you run the test, after you look back at your success criteria and you said like, hey, yes, we did move the needle, we learned something, these are the results, these is what we believe are our learnings and our next steps. We want to document that so that if we go back to our stakeholders internally, or we're looking at things in the future that we want to test, that we can still go back to this. And that's a very important step. To get started with that, to keep track of the experiments that you're going to run, I use a very simple template, especially if you're just getting started. This works really well. We're going to simply look to fill this out for every test that we do. It should take you about 30 minutes, maybe, once you have a clear idea on what you want to do. And this is where you want to plan out your experiments. And why is this so important? Planning is everything. Planning is everything because if you run a test, you want to have a clear start and end date. Why? Because we want to have a controlled environment. We want to know which users we're going to test this on. And we want to know when the test will stop and when we'll look at the results. So often I see people who start with A/B testing, they just turn on the switch and like, okay, we're going to run it. Look in a week, oh, we don't have much results yet. Look in 2 weeks, oh, we don't have much results yet. All of a sudden it's been 3 months, the test is still running. And it's like, yeah, but maybe something will change and then we'll start to see results. No. Don't want to do that. We want to have a clear start and end date of the experiment, usually about 10 to 14 days, because we want to get over the weekend effect. And then at some point we say stop, then we look at the results and we say, okay, hey, is the test successful, not successful, or inconclusive? And based on that, we can take next steps. Then we want to look at our primary, secondary, and monitoring metrics. So this is the success criteria that I was talking about earlier. So the primary metrics are really, okay, what's going to drive this test being successful? Let's say it's users who register for an account. That might be the primary metric and that might be successful, but yet I still want to have some secondary metrics. It might be day 1 and day 3 retention, because if they are heavily impacted by this, even though we got a lot more users to create an account, that might ultimately not be the positive business impact that we want. And then lastly, we want to have monitoring metrics, which is essentially just a metric that we want to keep an eye on. For example, user acquisition. How many new users did we get if we're testing something in the onboarding funnel? If it's much higher or lower than expected, this might influence our test results. And this might be because we ran a very big user acquisition campaign. Again, document your learnings. Do that in here or whatever template that you have. Put that into a slide. Bring that to a QBR or a monthly meeting or whatever you have, and that's how you're going to get your cycle started. Run 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, you run a new experiment. Follow up with each other. Maybe there's, if you got your tech stack set up right, you can do a couple at the same time, and this is really how you're going to then optimize your engagement strategy. Awesome. So just to wrap it up for today, if you want to build a top-notch marketing strategy, you really, got to look at these 4 points. So get your clear user definitions, get internal alignment. This is really, really step 1, so you know what you're working on and what you're building for. Build up your tech stack and really, from access to optimize, think about on each layer, what do we need here? Which tool is the best? If we use Telium for all our data collection, fantastic. How can we plug that into a Leanplum, or how can we build this into an attribution partner, or whatever it might be? Personalized engagement on timing, behavior, and content. Once you get to that engagement layer, personalization just works. We've seen it over and over again. You're using a user's name, using it based on their user engagement, so what they've done, their user behavior, really modify the content to what they're interested in, use that access layer, that data layer that we talked about. And then get a clear process to test, experiment, and improve over time. Once you have these things aligned, I think you're pretty set up to run an amazing marketing strategy. And I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. Thank you very much. That's all I had to share for